Welcome to the Happy Half Hour, everyone. We will be getting started here in just a second. And again, welcome to the virtual Happy Half Hour. Today is Friday, March 26th, and we are going to talk about a topic that is near and dear to my researcher's heart, which is thought leadership. And, you've heard it referred to as insights, as perspective in our own impact training. We talk about using thought leadership from a positioning perspective. And I have to say that what we're sharing today is quite eye-opening, and I'm very excited to get started. So I want to introduce Russ Scherer, our Director of Sales Strategy Effectiveness, who's going to help us on this journey.
I agree, Michelle. This is interesting because education is, not that our other topics aren't interesting as well, but I think that education has become a part of nearly every sale that goes on out there. And how to educate used to be just produce good information. But what we're going to see from some data from multiple sources is that just having good data, just sharing it, isn't enough anymore. We've got to kind of migrate the way in which we think about thought leadership. And our sponsor, once again, today is the Brooks Group Virtual Selling Bootcamp. If you're one of those people who is thinking, boy, this whole pandemic thing is almost over, I can put virtual away. Again, everything we've been seeing, everything we've been hearing is that we will continue to use the best of what we have done virtually over the course of the last year into the future to help with account coverage, to help with responsiveness, to help with expense budgets, while we also start to filter back in-person selling. So we'd encourage you to, when we get to that point, check out the Virtual Selling Bootcamp, pick up some skills before everything is totally wide open and you're asked to use them again. Today, 2 points in our outline. We're going to talk about just some real data around thought leadership, and then we're going to think about how do we evolve into a phrase that I don't think is really set in concrete yet, but I've been calling the sales guide. How do you lead the customer on the path through the buying journey? And we'll get to that in a little bit. But as always, Michelle has grabbed some great data in terms of what your peers and other folks in the B2B industry are thinking about when it comes to thought leadership. So, Michelle?
Thanks, Russ. And today we are going to talk about the value of thought leadership, right? So, Russ just said, we know thought leadership works, but let's take a look at where the value really is. So in 2020, Edelman Business Marketing and LinkedIn published the 2020 Business to Business Thought Leadership Impact Study. And this data reflects their US reporting. Over a period of 3 years, they compiled data from B2B purchase decision makers and thought leadership producers. So what we're showing you today reflects responses from about 1,160 business executives. And so these are their decision makers. Before, though, we actually show you the numbers, I just want to share with you the definition of thought leadership that they have put forth, just to give you some context. So they define thought leadership as free deliverables that organizations or individuals produce on a topic that they know a lot about and feel others can benefit from having their perspective on. So this does not include content that's solely focused on describing an organization's products or services. So we're not talking about marketing collateral, one sheets, that kind of thing. So according to this survey, 53% of decision makers spend 1 hour or more per week reading thought leadership. And 88% of those decision makers say thought leadership can be effective in enhancing their perceptions of an organization. So when you think about thought leadership working, clearly it makes a difference in terms of how your potential customers are viewing you. 59% actually say and agree that thought leadership is more trustworthy than marketing collateral, marketing materials, product sheets, and that kind of thing. And 41%, I think this is really interesting, will pay a premium to work with an organization that produces thought leadership over an organization that does not produce any. So again, it's decision makers are paying attention to thought leadership. They say it's effective in enhancing perceptions. And they agree that it's trustworthy and they will pay more for that good information.
And Michelle, one of the things we know we're seeing from a lot of different places is customers are asking us all the time, how do I hold my price premium? How do I get compensated for the extra service handholding experience that I bring to the table? And from this data, it seems a wide number of customers, 40+%, will pay for that if you're also one of these people who are sharing what you know about your market.
Exactly. And, we have, for years, Russ talked about in our training programs that there is value associated with that knowledge and with that expertise that organizations bring, right? So whether it's the sellers and their perspectives, that thought leadership. And so now we have the data even so to back that up.
Yeah.
But I think there's also a point, and what we're seeing, which was really eye-opening for me personally, was there becomes a point where good information becomes too much information. Gartner recently produced an ebook. It was called The 5 Ways the Future of Business-to-Business Buying Will Rewrite the Rules of Effective Selling. Long title, lots of good information in there. And they included data from a buyer survey that they conducted of about 1,170 some buyers. And what they identified was a trend of customers actually becoming overwhelmed with too much good information. So good, high quality thought leadership on its own is no longer the standalone differentiator that it once was. So you almost need that value interpreter. So again, let's take a look at some of these numbers. According to Gartner, 89% of buyers felt information related to a recent purchase was high quality, it was relevant, it was evidenced. So it was good information. 50% of those buyers say that they encounter, though, an overwhelming amount of trustworthy information. So there's almost too much good information. And this one also interesting, 44% find supplier information trustworthy, but contradictory. So you have a customer that's going out and looking at multiple vendors, and the insights and the information, the thought leadership that they're getting contradicts each other. So then they become confused. And this is what I really thought was just knocked me over almost. Conflicting information results in lower buyer confidence. So that was a finding from Gartner. And lower confidence lowers the likelihood of a customer making a significant purchase by up to 160%. So this was in the Gartner article, 160%. We have a saying here in the Brooks Group, we've said it for years, a confused buyer buys nothing. So, we're using thought leadership as a way to differentiate, but it may become overwhelming to the buyer if not positioned correctly in a way that it actually hurts you. And I thought that was quite interesting.
Yeah, I also think it also then forces, or at least encourages, certain salespeople to move back to that day when they used to sell based on features and benefits. And right. So the default position is to just scream louder and louder, well, mine is right, well, mine is right, well, mine is right. And that doesn't work. Right. We'll see in a minute.
Right. And so, and I know, Russ, you're going to be giving us some great insights and tactics on how to use thought leadership better. So I don't want folks to think that they need to throw the thought leadership out the window. We need to move forward with it and take a different approach. And so we're going to be talking about that here in just a minute.
Right.
So as Russ mentioned, we are sponsored by our virtual boot camp. So obviously we're in a virtual world right now. This is 4 workshops that provides your sales team with the tactical skills to really excel in a virtual environment. So how to get your customer to turn their camera on, how to conduct an effective presentation using virtual tools, which tool to use, whether it's phone or email or Zoom or Teams, in what kind of interaction. So really practical skills for selling in a virtual environment. If you're interested and would like more information on this, we have a class, I believe, starting in April. Producer Rich is going to put up the contact information, but send an email to contact@thebrooksgroup.com. And while we are talking about virtual boot camp, Russ also mentioned that many of us feel like we're turning the corner and perhaps the end of the pandemic is close at hand, and we might be ready to get back into in-person interaction. So we have a poll for you. And Rich, if you could launch that first poll, we want to get your thoughts on whether you're ready to go in person or stay virtual. There's our poll now. So can't wait to see what the crowd thinks. Are we ready to go back to in person? Are we liking virtual? And I think it's important to note also that virtual skills to some extent are going to be here to stay regardless of when we go back in person.
In the last week, I was on my first airplanes since this began a year ago, and you can see in the way people are interacting in airports, on planes, everywhere else that they can't wait to shed the masks. They can't wait to get back to the fact that we can gather in larger groups. So there is a strong desire to move in that direction.
Absolutely. I was on an in-person client meeting this week, and it was odd but good. It was nice. We social distanced. We were very safe, but it was good to interact in a face-to-face environment.
Yeah.
All right. So I've ended the poll. Let's see what the group says. So about 2/3 are ready to go back in person, and about 1/3 are liking the virtual.
Yeah, this is interesting. We did a similar poll this week on LinkedIn, and I think our percentages were just about the same. I think it was about 2/3, 1/3. So
right. And I think this also indicates virtual is not going away completely anytime soon. So Rich, if you could launch that second poll question. Now we want to find out the definition of soon. So for those of you that are ready to get back in person, what does that actually mean? Are you looking to go in person Q2, Q3, Q4 of this year, or are you pushing it out to next year?
It's one of those words soon that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, right? So
exactly.
I appreciate the fact to kind of think through and come up with that.
Yeah. And we are, I think, easing back into some in-person trainings, and obviously doing that in a safe way and ensuring that we are adhering to all the appropriate protocols.
All right.
All right, let's see, what have we got here? So it looks like Q3 2021 is the big winner. 41% have defined that officially as soon. Q2 of 2021 this year, so within the next 3 months, 20% are saying that's when they'll be ready to resume, and then the rest is divided out between Q4 and Q1 of next year. Well, thank you all very much for that input. And I'm going to turn it over to Russ.
Like far too many of my predictions, I nailed the timing. I just got the year wrong. For some reason, last year when this whole thing started, I thought summertime 2020 would be when we were all back together again.
You and everybody else.
So Michelle's kind of defined what we mean by thought leadership, but I want to talk about it from the perspective of the salesperson. She's really talked about the materials and the content that we develop, but we have taught for a long time, and I think it's important to note that salespeople themselves can be thought leaders when they share the right information, when they understand their industry, and they bring more to the table than just a knowledge of their product or even their particular segment of the business that they're working at. And we've talked it for a long time in the Brooks Group that, it's like brushing your teeth. It's, learn, share, repeat. And the more you share, the more you gain. And what that does is it helps to build credibility. Zig Ziglar, I believe, was the one who said that if you tell me a story about somebody like me, where you solved a problem that's similar to the problem I have, then I will listen to you. And so it's a way in which we build trust inside organizations. It's a way to add value to any meeting or conversation we're a part of. We can share that information if we do it intelligently based on other customers and calls. Even we can do it through social media. We've seen a lot of growth in LinkedIn and groups where, again, you're not sharing individual company information that would be proprietary, but you're sharing the trends that you see as a salesperson in your industry. And so that's really what I think thought leadership is and will continue to be. So let's take a look at the problem. Michelle outlined a little bit of it, but I want to dig in just a little bit more, again, to sort of reinforce some of the strengths of what it is. 80% of the people, this is some survey data from a Demand Gen report, 80% of sellers who use thought leadership close what they call high quality, low regret deals. And that means larger deals, higher gross margin deals. It's the kind of business we want to write where we get fair value for our products and the seller feels and the buyer feels like it was a really good transaction for both of them. And then I like this. This came out of all places. Texas Lawyers magazine has done some research, and they found that nearly half of C-suite people will provide personal contact information once they have read or interacted with somebody who's got high brand content. So it just shows that this education is really a part of selling, and that it works at all levels to be a strategic resource. But the problem, like everything, is we're just overwhelmed. This is some data that I got a couple of months ago, so the numbers aren't too far off. 7.5 million blog posts a day, 2 million articles or LinkedIn posts, 100 million Instagram editions. And if you just Google thought leadership, I came up with 934 million Google results. Now, I didn't look at all of those. I really looked at just sort of the first page or maybe the page and a half. But it just says there's just so much information out there. And so, as usually happens when there's something that's good, when there's something that's valuable, we tend to sort of just keep doing it until we're overwhelmed, and we can be confused. Now, I have a great idea to demonstrate that for any of you who are golfers or any of you who aren't. Listen to this gentleman talk about the thought leadership he's gained.
I've been asked many times, JC, what are your swing thoughts as you're swinging? What are the secrets? What are the secrets of golf that pros know? Well, I heard this one time, and I remembered it, and it's really, if you'd write this down, it really helped. What I try to do, I try to flat load my feet so I can snap load my power package. That way I can amplify both lag and drag pressure through impact fix. As long as my number 2 power accumulator doesn't break down, I can reach maximum centripetal force with minimum pivotal resistance. You see, the pivot is the utilization of multiple centers to produce a circular motion for generating centrifugal force on an adjusted plane, plus the maintenance and balance necessary to promote the 2-line delivery path. See, golf is geometrically oriented linear force. It involves the physical and muscular thrust and the geometry of the circle. You can divide the golf swing into 24 basic components, each having between 12 and 15 variations. Now, when you think of all this and you get it all set, hopefully you'll hit shots like this.
So there's clearly an individual who has been loaded up, shall we say, with various thought leadership information. And so what do we do about it? Well, here's some information that comes from Gardner, and we've done some further thinking and discussions on this as well. But he says when it comes to thought leadership in sales, there are 3 different kinds of thought leadership salespeople. The first one is giving, and giving people believe that the more, the better. The more information that you can talk about, boy, all of that is just great. And so they load them up. These are the people who, when they go on a sales call physically in the old days, they used to deliver, 2 inches of information on the product, or they drop off, every single catalog version that you produce in case something is of value. The equivalent today in a digital world is you send out a whole series of attachments, a couple of videos, you encourage and send links. And what happens is, and this has been the case even since the days of paper, that you just overwhelm the client. And then the result is they tend to either not look at any of it, or they tend to flip through it very, very quickly. The whole idea of sales enablement started as the idea of mapping what do you bring to the client journey along the way. That's the giving type. Number 1 is telling, which is really just sort of about experiences alone. It's kind of that, if it was an old Western movie, the guy who does the cooking in the stagecoach, who at the end of the day says, well, in my day, and then begins to tell the stories that they've seen. And there's great value in that. Believe me, that clients want to hear what other people are doing. But if you make it just on your experiences alone, the client begins to be concerned that you haven't seen the same situation or a broad enough set of situations to help them. And so what Gartner has come up with as a recommendation, and I think makes a lot of sense, is to be a sense maker. Help them to understand and to focus in on what matters most. The sales guide is another way that I refer to it. Just as our friend the golfer gave us all of those swing thoughts, all of which have value in a golf swing, there were probably one or two of them that would really make a difference if you were trying to improve your golf game. And that's really what the sense maker tries to do. They really try to focus in on what matters most. Because here's the issue. If you look at a sort of a normalized curve, everyone knows kind of the up and down normal curve. The value of the amount of information that is presented continues on until just sort of the middle of that normal curve. So every additional piece of information helps with that decision. And then you get to the sort of the max, the top point of the curve. And from that point on, you just become overwhelmed. And so you make a gut decision. Ever been trying to figure out, say, which restaurant to go to, and you look and there's 3 different restaurants, they all have 4.5 stars. There's always a couple of people who hate it, a couple of people who love it. And ultimately you just say, all right, look, fine, I'm going to go to this one because I like the name, or it's got a better set of photographs or whatever it is. And so if we're not careful with thought leadership in trying to educate and ask our clients to make a rational decision, we actually push them into what we call the emotional or the motivational based on the gut. Sense makers are the ones that help buyers, though, to figure out what is important, to sort through of everything, what are the right questions to ask, which reduces the skepticism of the buyer all the way through and increases the confidence in that particular seller. We, for a lot of years at the Brooks Group, have talked about you want to become a strategic advisor or a trusted resource. And when I was selling, a lot of times I would get calls from customers and they would say, I know you don't sell this, but I'm looking at this. And what they were looking for, without asking it, was somebody to help them make sense out of 2 or 3 different products that were making very similar claims, maybe had some slight things different, but they needed some help. And I always felt like that was a great position of trust and resource to be in. So how do we become a sales guide? We've got some sort of simple, straightforward steps here. Number 1, make sure that you understand when to deliver the key information. And we talk, and I've talked a fair amount about the buyer's journey, how they go from sort of not even thinking about a decision to deciding they need something to actively being involved in seeking vendors to making a decision. So understand all through that process how you can help. Some great research I read in the last week or so talked about the idea that when we're selling to get into an account, our whole job as salespeople is to get the status quo to change, get people uncomfortable with the status quo. If I'm selling a renewal or that second piece of business, it's almost the opposite. I want to convince them that the status quo is good, that working with me is a great thing, and therefore they should renew and just continue to buy. And so as we look at our materials, as we look at the thought leadership, let's map it to where the journey is. And then be asking yourself the question, what do they need to answer right now? Part of this, you can ask them where they are and what they're going through, what kind of committees are meeting to walk through it. But the better we can get at delivering the right information at the right point in time, it's great. It's like Google Maps, right? You want to know the next turn and probably am I going to go left or right after that. The last thing you would like for Google Maps to do is to say 3 hours down the road, you're going to need to turn left. So be watching for the gas station that's on the corner in 3 hours. Number 2, a lot of what we've seen through the pandemic, buyers want to do self-service. They want to be able to go get this information. So make sure your websites or the information that you provide makes it easy for them to get to kind of the key pieces of data they're looking for. But they're also looking at some points for sales engagement. So help them to be flexible. Don't require, in other words, that they always talk to a salesperson before they get information. Don't require that they always have to work through a certain path. Be flexible enough to give the people what they want when they're there. Selling increasingly, as it says, happens without a salesperson being present. And I think even more so after the pandemic, we'll do more upfront virtually or self-service. And then when we have a meeting, it's really going to count. That first time we're in front of a client, there'll be fewer of those held. They'll already have done some downsizing of the list of vendors. And our job there is to really make sure that we pour in value. And I love this phrase. I picked it up in some reading I was doing. We need to become, if we're a sales guide, to be situationally fluent. We need to be able to address the context, the concreteness, and then to contrast wherever they are with the status quo. So when a customer says to you, well, we're thinking about this, understand where they are in the journey and be ready to share with them kind of how what you do or what your industry does can help them along. Become concrete in terms of the real reasons why they need to be thinking about this or that. And then if you're trying to get into the account, continually contrast it with the status quo, because as Michelle said, a confused buyer buys nothing, which means that more and more people, if they get into the buying decision and get confused, they're stopping. We've seen some data recently that about 40% of more complex sales are starting down the journey of buying something, and they just stop. They just get to the point where they can't really do anything. They want to just walk away and never complete the transaction. So those three things I think are really important to being a sales guide. Map it in, understand where they can get the data either way, and then you as the salesperson be fluent about the situation. Don't be talking about things that are way down the road. It's okay to kind of let the path so they know where you're going, but make sure that you're in context and you're concrete about the things you're talking about right now. And that's kind of the information. If you've got some questions, we'd love to take a couple through Q&A. So please use Q&A, use chat, bring up information about what it means to be a thought leader. We'd be glad to answer those.
Russ, I love the comment around really altering and thinking about whether you're with a new prospect versus an existing customer. I think sometimes that gets overlooked. In terms of the messaging, you want to shake things up or just reinforce the status quo.
Yeah.
And I think that really makes a lot of sense.
I was working with a client this week, and they were talking about how they had great confidence that their product was best in class in a certain segment of the marketplace, but in another segment of the marketplace, they were struggling to make sure that people could recognize those advantages. And we talked about a little bit about thought leadership and how do we set the stage right to be able to make sure people are considering the right things and not, as typically happens, not let price become too early of a factor in deciding between options.
Yeah. And also really, as you said, learning to read and speak the situation, really staying in alignment with where your buyer is on their journey. It's one of the core principles of impact, but also makes sense, I think, in this particular context as well. Absolutely.
So what do we take away from this? Number one, don't give up on thought leadership. Michelle's data was very important. Nearly 90% of customers think it's important. They're spending an hour a day with it. Over 40% of them will pay a premium price to connect with somebody who they see as a thought leader. But don't overpower them with tonnage, whether that's tonnage of paper or tonnage of bits. Be one of these people who helps them make sense of where they're going. Be a sales guide. One of those folks who maybe a scout, one of those people who understands the trail ahead of the direction of the broad group, and you help get them there safely, so to speak. Think the right information at the right time. That's what we want when we're looking for something. Enable and don't fear self-service. A lot of sales groups I know are afraid that, well, if I put too much information on the web, then they won't ever talk to me. Well, I would turn it the other way around, which is if for some reason I'm afraid my customers are going to read my information and not connect, maybe I'm either communicating the wrong information or the wrong people are coming to my website. So think about that as a way to continue to groom and to help bring people into the fold. And then last of all, learn to read and to speak into the situation. The fear of buyers is real. The fear of organizations of making the wrong commitment has gotten way out ahead of just making a commitment. And so read, speak, and understand kind of where they are and help them through that process. As a result, they will value you more, they will trust you in your organization more, and that's going to help you drive results in the long term. Our next webinar will be Friday, April 9th, and it was decided in the last a little while that we're going to talk about negotiation. How do you get your team ready for what are probably going to be some pretty tough negotiation conversations in 2021? And so Friday, the April 18th, our next virtual happy half hour on negotiation. What does your team need to know to win in 2019 or 2021? 2019 was a long time ago. Forget that.
It's been a long year, Russ.
Yeah, let the happy hour, the virtual part drop off and let the real part begin, right?
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Don't forget, check out the virtual boot camp if that may be of value for you. And we look forward to seeing you virtually on April 9th.
All right. Goodbye, everybody.